My first run-in with Rogue was when I watched Anna Paquin play her. Maybe it's because I was younger, but I definitely had a crush on her, and over the years, I've become a bit of a Rogue fan. She's really cool through and through. She can walk away from hits that would kill others. She can fly. She has a lot of strength. You get the drift. But here's the thing. There are some things about her that are not okay, especially when it comes to her powers. That's because she nearly destroyed Carol Danvers, then Miss Marvel, and took those powers that defined Rogue for years. So in a way, Rogue's greatest power is actually the proof of her worst crime. Let me explain. And if you're coming to this from X-Men 97, then this is the same history that the animated universe has already put on screen. Rogue's real mutant power. Before we get into Carol Danvers and what happened between them, let's talk about Rogue's actual mutant power, because some people think her mutant powers include flight and strength. But actually, her original power is absorption through skin contact. When she touches someone, she pulls in pieces of who they are, their strengths, their fighting skills, and sometimes their powers, and even, in some cases, their memories. The longer the contact lasts, the deeper her absorption goes. For most people she has touched over the years, the effect is pretty temporary. The powers and memories she absorbs usually fade from Rogue within minutes or hours. For much of Rogue's history, it's been beyond her control because that's just how the power behaves. If you look at the early depictions of her in the comics, you would see that if she held on for too long, the transfer could become permanent. Like, in the worst-case scenario, a victim could be left comatose or even dead. That's how dangerous her powers can be. That's also why most of the time Rogue stays covered up. Gloves, long sleeves, physical distance from everyone, especially if they're people she loves. Because just a hug or a kiss could end up being the last one of someone's life if it's from her, and that's a lot to carry on someone's shoulders. That one detail has single-handedly changed every single relationship in the comics and cartoons, including the one with Gambit that fans have obsessed with for decades. That's why touch starvation and isolation are such big parts of her character. The day Rogue met Carol Danvers. Rogue's first appearance in the comics was in Avengers Annual number 10, which was published back in 1981. At the time, she was not even an X-Man. She was just a young member of Mystique's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and her debut story centered on the aftermath of her ambush of Carol Danvers, who at the time was going by the name Miss Marvel. She would later trade in that name for Captain Marvel, but yeah, that's her. She was a former Air Force officer and a veteran Avenger, with her own legacy stretching through her solo series, which had been canceled a couple of years earlier. Rogue basically absorbs Miss Marvel's powers during a confrontation and throws her from the Golden Gate Bridge. Mystique was the one who orchestrated this whole attack, and during this fight, Rogue maintained skin contact for way longer than usual. And in Carol's case, the transfer basically became permanent. The issue opens with Spider-Woman rescuing an unconscious and disoriented woman falling from the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and that woman is Carol Danvers. When she's taken to the hospital, the doctors can see that she is physically okay, but has no memory at all. So, seeing this state, Spider-Woman called Professor Xavier because he was honestly the only one who could have helped Carol. And Xavier finds out that Carol's mind has been completely wiped. The only thing that Xavier could pull from the wreckage that was left was a single lingering image of the woman who did this to her, Rogue. Xavier is later able to restore Carol's memories, but not her emotional connection to them. While all this is happening, Rogue actually flies off to New York and attacks the Avengers Mansion itself, absorbing both Captain America and Thor in the process, basically strength maxing fully. Mystique, on the other hand, infiltrates Stark International while disguised as the Wasp and plants a device on Iron Man's armor, which basically paralyzed him. and then using the disabled Iron Man as a weapon by dropping him onto the generator that inhibited prisoners' powers at Riker's Island, Mystique and Rogue manage to free the rest of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants from prison. This eventually leads to a whole battle between the Avengers and the Brotherhood, and as the power borrowed from Captain America and Thor faded, the Avengers turned the battleground. Rogue still walked away with super strength, flight, durability, and near invulnerability, as well as Carol's personality and memories. Why this makes Rogue's powers so dark? So now that you know, every time you see Rogue flying around in the classic comics or this animated continuity, she is using a power she didn't earn. Many of the fights she wins in those stories involve powers that she took from someone by doing the worst thing possible to them. It's kind of messed up how most of the superhero stories that we know and love are basically self-contained. Like, nobody else loses anything in exchange for our hero to gain their power. In the case of Rogue, though, she actually drained it from another hero and risked leaving Carol with nothing. Carol, even if you don't like her one bit, is a good hero. She's righteous, she's protective, and she's someone you want on your team. Her heroism is real, and Rogue almost got rid of that hero for us. Now sure, after Rogue got the powers, does she use them for good? Yeah, she does. She is a genuine hero too. But that doesn't change the fact that she took them in such a harrowing way. And understandably, after such an experience, it took Carol years to actually forgive the woman who did this to her. They have a shared trauma from when Rogue was in her villainous youth era, but over the years, depending on whose work you're reading, they've grown to respect each other. So when you see Carol and Rogue being tense around each other, even though no fight happened in the comic issue or the episode, remember, it is happening because of this history right here.
Can't keep me bottled up in there forever. Leave me alone!
Carol inside Rogue's mind. This has to be the most interesting result of this little power exchange. So remember that I was telling you what Rogue absorbed during this little exchange? Well, she also absorbed a version of Carol's psyche. That came along for the ride and then stayed lodged somewhere inside Rogue's mind. It could lie dormant for years, but it was never truly gone. And then it comes alive at the worst possible time. One of the most emotionally devastating versions of this idea actually plays out in a classic X-Men the Animated Series episode. Here, the 9th episode of the 2nd season, aptly titled A Rogue's Tale, tells us the story of how Rogue is haunted by fragmented memories and a lingering presence of Miss Marvel inside her head. Professor Xavier helped her suppress these memories after she left the Brotherhood, but then Mystique showed up. She wanted Rogue back on her team, and to do that, she lured Rogue into the hospital where Carol lay comatose. In front of Carol, Mystique made Rogue touch her, and remember, with that contact, all the buried memories came out. And with those memories comes the guilt Rogue kept buried, and eventually that second personality starts fighting to be the one in control. For a Saturday morning cartoon, this show took a very dark turn because we can see how overwhelmed and close to losing control Rogue gets. She starts flying erratically and smashing upwards through multiple floors of the X-Mansion, seemingly under the control of someone else. Jean Grey had to use Cerebro to enter Rogue's mind to, sort everything out. And what did she meet there? An autonomous version of Miss Marvel's consciousness fighting to permanently take over Rogue's body. Jean and Rogue worked together to fight back, and together they managed to seal that psychic version of Carol away to give Rogue back control over her own mind. And right after that, Rogue rejects Mystique, telling her that she is with the X-Men now, and Mystique should buzz off. Rogue finally returns to the room, and this time she tells the doctors Carol's name. It's a small gesture, and the episode ends with Carol's brain activity monitor showing a slight flicker, almost like Carol recognized what Rogue just did for her. The exact mechanics of Carol living inside Rogue's head have shifted around in the comics over the decades, from one writer to another, but the core concept has remained the same. So in a way, while yes, Rogue got the power-up, she's also a tragic character because she's carrying way more than just power from that incident.
Mama, something's wrong! I want to let go!
Mystique's role. Rogue is not innocent, of course, because she's the one who touched Carol and stayed on for far too long, but the person who put her in that position in the first place was Mystique. In the animated continuity, Rogue ran away from a bigoted father, and it was Mystique who took her in. She became Rogue's mother figure, and then trained her to be a weapon for the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Rogue's introduction to her own powers was handled by someone who wanted to use the same powers to do harmful things to others. And Mystique was the one who pushed Rogue towards Miss Marvel in the first place and asked her not to let go. Everything that happened with Carol and Rogue happened because of Mystique's manipulation. And before you argue that Rogue could have simply said no, it wasn't that simple because she was a teen who wanted to listen to the person she trusted the most. She was terrified, and when she realized what was happening, Mystique insisted she keep going. So clearly, if there's anyone you should be blaming for this whole ordeal, Mystique definitely has some fault in that. So the fairest and most accurate way to look at the whole situation would be that Rogue committed the act because Mystique was the one who manipulated her and Carol was the victim. Why Rogue became an X-Man. Rogue joining the X-Men doesn't change what happened to Danvers, but it is a step in the right direction. Because Rogue's arc has always been about choosing what to do with the powers that she stole. Once she was out of Mystique's influence, Rogue walked away from the Brotherhood entirely, instead of continuing to be the weapon she was raised to be. She instead started using them to protect people from being hurt. Professor Xavier became the one person who was able to quiet the chaos in her mind and give her some peace, which is partly how she ended up finding her place with the X-Men in the first place. The road to Xavier and becoming an X-Man was not smooth. In Uncanny X-Men number 171, Rogue showed up at the mansion herself, desperate and falling apart from the psychic backlash of everything she absorbed from Carol. She begged Xavier to help her, and, well, the other X-Men on the ground were not thrilled. She is, after all, the woman who destroyed Miss Marvel. They don't want her on their team, but despite those objections, Xavier accepts her on probation. And then Carol finds out. By this point, Carol is back on her feet, going by binary, and when she finds out that Xavier let Rogue join his X-Men, she is furious. She confronts them, rightfully so, might I add, and the rage we see in the panels is as raw as it can get. Because Rogue joining the X-Men was not a clean redemption. And this is where Gambit kind of comes into the bigger picture. I mean, the whole no-touchy bit has its melodramatic angle, yes, but it also carries extra weight because of what happened between Rogue and Carol Danvers years ago. Rogue knows exactly what can happen when she touches someone, and that's why she's so afraid of doing it again to Gambit or anyone. So she holds herself back, protecting the man she loves, even if it makes things so much more angsty and sad. And there you have it, guys. That's the ugly truth behind Rogue and her powers. A huge part of her classic kick-assery comes from the pain she caused someone else. She stole someone's powers, and that's one of the darkest acts in X-Men history. It should never be forgotten because what she did was genuinely terrible, and she's carried it with her every day since. Remembering that is the least we can do as her fans, and Rogue's real story is spending the rest of her life trying to become worthy of the power that she stole. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.